Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday, the 29th of January in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, the UK's Chancellor Reeves wants to go further and faster to boost growth by unblocking new infrastructure projects.
Microsoft is investigating whether a DeepSeek-linked group obtained OpenAI data without authorization.
Plus, collaborating in secret, Bloomberg learns Apple and SpaceX are working to add the Starlink network to iPhones.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The UK's Chancellor Reeves will pledge today to boost the economy by unblocking new infrastructure projects and deregulation. In a speech intended to reframe the narrative around her tenure so far, Reeves will say growth won't come without a fight. It's a message Keir Starmer has also sought to deliver in the last 24 hours.
The number one priority of this Labour government is growth. And by that I mean wealth creation. We have to get our economy working. I think we're beginning to see how that's turning around. We'll build on that as we go forward.
Keir Starmer speaking there as he joined the Chancellor in Bloomberg's London headquarters yesterday to pitch the government's plan to business. Reeves' speech is expected to include a green light for new homes and transport links between Oxford and Cambridge, as well as possible backing for a third runway at Heathrow. We'll have live coverage on Bloomberg Radio of the speech for our UK audience starting at 10 a.m. London time.
Microsoft and OpenAI are investigating whether data from OpenAI's technology was obtained in an unauthorized way by a group linked to China's DeepSeek. DeepSeek and the hedge fund High Flyer, where DeepSeek was started, did not immediately respond to requests for comment. It comes as President Donald Trump's AI czar, David Sacks, told Fox News that there is substantial evidence that the Chinese AI startup did distill knowledge from OpenAI models.
There's a technique in AI called distillation, which you're going to hear a lot about. And it's when one model learns from another model. Effectively, what happens is that the student model asks the parent model a lot of questions, just like a human would learn. But AIs can do this, asking millions of questions, and they can essentially mimic the reasoning process that they learn from the parent model, and they can kind of suck the knowledge out of the parent model. And there's substantial evidence that what DeepSeek did here is they distilled the knowledge out of OpenAI's models. And I don't think OpenAI is very happy about this.
In a statement, OpenAI didn't directly address those comments by David Sacks, but did say that they know companies based in the People's Republic of China and others are, quote, constantly trying to distill the models of leading US AI companies. Markets are continuing to grapple with the impact of DeepSeek's AI model known as R1, which was produced at a fraction of the cost of its US competitors, leading to a $1 trillion rout in tech stocks.
Apple has been secretly working with SpaceX and T-Mobile US to include the Starlink network in its latest iPhone software. Bloomberg has learned that the smartphone's latest software update, released this week, supports the technology. The tie-up comes as a surprise. Apple already provides its own offering, and neither company had signalled the change was coming.
A judge has temporarily halted President Trump's surprise order to freeze federal grant funding. The order was issued after a lawsuit filed by a coalition of non-profit organizations. New York Senator Chuck Schumer was highly critical of the measures.
In an instant, with no precedent, no justification, no legal grounds, Donald Trump has shut off billions, perhaps trillions of dollars that help American families every single day.
New York Senator Chuck Schumer speaking there. The original White House memo sparked widespread confusion and panic about its broad scope, which included anti-poverty initiatives and medical research, as well as other forms of aid. Some Republicans have supported the president's announcement on spending, whilst Democrats have described the plans as unconstitutional.
LVMH has reported subdued demand as wealthy shoppers remain cautious. The luxury giant posted a 1% decline in sales of fashion and leather goods during the last 3 months of 2024, while revenue grew by just 1%. Despite both figures being ahead of analyst estimates, revenue disappointed as the firm's recurring income fell by 14%. LVMH's CEO Bernard Arnault is optimistic about the prospects in the United States, telling reporters that Donald Trump has brought a wind of optimism. The billionaire also referred to his return to France after the US presidential inauguration as a cold shower.
Now, supersonic air travel might be returning to passenger flights. A new aircraft from Boom Technology broke the sound barrier for the first time in tests yesterday. Bloomberg's James Wilcock has more.
It's been 20 years since Concorde's final flight. Now, Boom Technology want to revive the dream of taking you from London to Miami in less than 5 hours. This is the sound of their first major step taking off.
And she's airborne.
Their XB-1 craft is now the first civil supersonic jet made in America, but the company plans to go bigger. They intend to carry passengers on a supersonic commercial airliner 3 times larger by 2029. It's a tough challenge. Boom is one of the few players left in the space due to the financial and technical difficulties. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
Those are your top stories. On the markets, we saw a rebound in tech shares yesterday. The Nasdaq finishing up 1.6%. European stock futures pointing higher, 0.75% on the Euro Stoxx 50 today. We have the Federal Reserve decision later on. 10-year Treasury yield ahead of that, down a basis point to 4.52%. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is a tenth weaker. We've got the Japanese yen 3/10 stronger at 155.14 against the dollar.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on what to expect from the UK Chancellor's speech on growth later today and Apple's latest innovation with Starlink. But first, a word on another story that we've been reading this morning from our opinion columnist about food, the highs and lows. This is Howard Trayuan, who is a dedicated foodie. He's always got a great piece out.
Yeah, he does. He's a great Instagram account as well, if you want to follow his various culinary adventures. Ooh. But he's been writing about the dominance of French cooking in contemporary cuisine, referring to the latest Bocuse d'Or competition, which is named after the legendary Lyonnais chef Paul Bocuse. He says that, this is something that's kind of been true with that history, is that even now the hottest new restaurants are French restaurants. It's sort of a lot of people's entryway into the business. It's seen as being sort of the hegemony of cooking, if you want. But, and this is the part that I really love about this piece, he also talks about that it's not about everything being fancy and wonderful, and even the most incredible creations can fall flat, whereas sometimes you really just want the slice of pizza from the place that you like in Greenwich, or that you want to have your favourite noodle dish from your local Cantonese restaurant, or, they're talking about the love of the kind of simple, not low cuisine, he points out, just good food.
Okay, yeah, I wonder whether any French person would agree with that. I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely. Favourite French food? You lived in France for years. I've lived in France for years. Favourite French food?
Oh, I mean, it can't be a duck parmentier.
Ratatouille. Force-fed it as a child, love it as an adult. There you go. Great piece on the terminal to think about this morning.
Let's bring you more now on the Chancellor Rachel Reeves' plans to go further and faster to boost the UK economy through new infrastructure projects. Our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden is with us now for more. Lizzie, what are we expecting from the Chancellor today?
So we're expecting her to give the green light to a load of infrastructure projects, possibly signalling backing for a third runway at Heathrow. This is something we've been reporting on all week. We're also expecting announcements focused on building up this region around Oxford and Cambridge to make what they're calling the potential to be Europe's Silicon Valley. So we'll get announcements on more funding to improve transport in the area, housing as well, and we're expecting the appointment of Science Minister Patrick Vallance as the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor champion. So putting flesh on the bones of that growth ambition that you heard from Keir Starmer a moment ago.
Yeah, okay. Criticism, though, of course, that it centres a lot on the south and the southeast of England rather than the rest of the country already. Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer were here in Bloomberg's European headquarters in London yesterday to make this pitch to business leaders. If you've read any of this on the Bloomberg website, you'll see a nice picture of them also sitting there. What have they been hearing in terms of what the business leaders think about this pitch from government?
Well, it was interesting. Stephen and I spoke to Cathy Wood yesterday, the CEO and co-founder of ARK Invest, and she was quite clear that it's good Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are going for it when it comes to this messaging on growth. And actually, she's making lots of investments here in the UK. But then we spoke to the former Tesco CEO, Dave Lewis, and he said you can't just talk the UK to growth. You need joined up thinking across government. You need action. And I mentioned the announcement that we're expecting on a third runway at Heathrow, despite the opposition on climate grounds within the cabinet. And actually, we've also on Bloomberg TV been speaking to the Ryanair CFO about this, and there's a different opposition here. He says, yes, we'd be keen to see more growth. Yes, we'd be keen to see more capacity. But in his words, if you really want the airlines to grow in the UK, you need to bring down the taxes on passengers arriving and leaving the country. So it's not just as easy as building a third runway. And of course, businesses got absolutely whacked with the tax hikes in the October budget.
And that's contributed to this narrative that we've had around the Labour government in recent months, adding to a run of bad economic data as well. Is this going to be enough to turn around the sort of doom narrative that there is around the government?
Well, if you look at all the data recently, it's gloomy. And that economic messaging has weighed on the economy. You've got private sector activity stagnating, public sector borrowing overshooting forecasts, jobs cut at the fastest pace since the financial crisis, consumer confidence at its lowest in more than a year, not to mention the 2 bouts of market turmoil, and the fact that the change in the non-dom rules mean that there's been an exodus of millionaires out of the UK. So ultimately, yes, growth is the holy grail, but it's going to take time to materialise in the data. Reeves knows this, and she's going to say today, growth will not come without a fight. There'll be a fight on the climate when it comes to Heathrow, but Labour's on the ropes. Starmer's got this big majority. Now it's time to take on his opponents.
Yeah, I mean, I think the swift retort to that is why? Why does it take a fight on growth? I think business leaders might be kind of scratching their heads on that. Also, I thought it was fascinating, though, the Chancellor talking, the Prime Minister talking about AI, artificial intelligence. When he was speaking to business leaders, he said that the UK would strip away regulation, strip away the inhibition of planning and use AI to take us forward. This at a very interesting sort of pivotal time in development of AI, Lizzie, and I wonder also how that is actually going to be delivered.
Yeah, I think an interesting question is whether you can get the top AI talent to stay in the UK, stay around Oxford and Cambridge when you've got the tax system as it is in the UK compared to the US, when you have salaries as they are, and whether you can get these companies to list here. We already lost Arm, for example, and whether we have the energy policies to support it. That's Dave Lewis's new project. And yes, the Labour government has made lots of noises about green energy, the transition. But when you've got Donald Trump across the pond talking about drill, baby, drill and harnessing fossil fuels to boost growth using the AI boom, can the UK keep up?
Look, I think there's a really interesting question here too around how much deregulation can deliver and how the UK positions itself between the United States and that approach, as you mentioned, Lizzie, from Donald Trump of wanting to drive towards deregulation, and then the signals that are also coming out of the European Union. You know, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is presenting her competitiveness compass today, which is supposed to also include talk of cutting red tape for businesses. When we spoke to Cathy Wood yesterday, she was quite favourable about how the approach the UK is taking as being sort of the middle way between the more regulation in Europe and the less in the United States. And she wasn't that concerned, although she is too in favour of deregulation and has praised Donald Trump's efforts. She didn't seem that concerned that rules were going to be stifling the innovation opportunity in the UK.
No, indeed. But as you say, Cathy Wood, very much somebody who is a risk taker, and she is behind Donald Trump's deregulation. There are others on the other side of the coin who'll say, look, Rachel Reeves is talking about deregulation. She's axed the Competition and Markets Authority chair, delayed the introduction of stricter bank capital rules, but that will come at a cost, and a cost to consumers. You've got regulation for a reason, and so they have to make this bold statement, and at the moment it is growth at pretty much any cost.
Well, except that they have not included, of course, the two main drivers of economic growth, as economists would see it, closer ties to the European Union and migration. On those points, the Labour government doesn't seem to be changing. And on workers' rights, again, more regulation coming in. There doesn't seem to be a change in tone on that front either.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point. John Micklethwaite had his sit down with the business secretary and the Chancellor at Davos, and they were saying that it would be growth over climate when it came to Heathrow, or hinting at that. So then the question becomes, why aren't you prioritising growth when it comes to the EU relationship? Look, there's likely to be a compromise here. Reeves has signalled in interviews over the weekend that the UK is open to membership of the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention, as that looks to ease trade frictions with the EU. And of course, there is the huge political headache of reversing Brexit. So you can see Labour trying to inch towards those closer trade ties with the EU.
OK, more details to come from Rachel Reeves later on today. We will bring that speech to you live for our UK listeners here on Bloomberg Radio as well. For now, Lizzie Burden, our UK correspondent, thank you very much for joining us.
Now, Bloomberg has learned that Apple has been secretly working with SpaceX and T-Mobile in the US to add support for the Starlink network to iPhones. Our chief technology correspondent, Mark Gurman, joins us now for more on his reporting. Mark, good morning. Thanks for being with us. So, firstly, what's the goal of this tie-up and what does it actually mean for an iPhone user? You're going to have to take me through this very slowly, Mark.
Okay, so good morning. Thank you so much for having me. So really today, phones connect to the network in two ways. There's the home way, which is you go on your home Wi-Fi network. This is typically when you're at the office, when you're at your house, when you download movies, you want to download a TV show, you want to play games. But when you're out and about, you're connecting to the cellular data network, right? And so you're using your carrier plan in order to use the web browser, to do text messaging, to do other things you would normally do on your phone that require an internet connection. But slowly emerging is a third way of downloading data to the phone, and that's satellite networks. And Elon Musk's SpaceX, other companies, including Apple itself, with a partner known as Globalstar, have been working on satellite networks for iPhones in order to do text messaging and emergency services in places like a long hike, or a back road that may not have cellular connection. The idea, use satellites far away, hundreds of miles away in the sky, in order to always stay connected. And Apple has its own service that it rolled out a few years ago with Globalstar for emergency services. Late last year, they enabled text messaging over that network. But there's alternatives. In SpaceX, through a new one called Starlink, is its own new satellite network that Apple is now also going to support on the iPhone. In the US, this is starting with T-Mobile, but SpaceX's Starlink, they're in negotiations with other carriers around the world to tie to their networks as well. So this could be offered outside the US eventually as well.
So what if Apple were developing their own system for this? Why go to Starlink? Why do a deal with them?
So yes, indeed, Apple has its own service. This is through Globalstar. It's called Emergency SOS over Satellite, or iMessage over Satellite. This is available in many countries around the world. But the carriers, they want to have their own satellite providers as well, right? The carriers don't want to get jettisoned by this service from Apple, this service from other companies. So they're partnering, right? And so T-Mobile's partner is SpaceX Starlink, Verizon and AT&T, the other major carriers in the US, other carriers around the world, they're negotiating their own partnerships. And in order to keep those carrier relationships healthy, Apple has to work with these third-party solutions as well. I also believe they're doing this to avoid antitrust scrutiny. It would be a big antitrust violation if Apple were to promote its satellite service and then block these third-party services as well that are, by the way, already tied to the networks that its iPhone customers are paying for.
So what's the plan then to roll out these services going forwards?
So I can speak to Starlink and the T-Mobile service. As of now, it's in a very early beta. There's probably fewer than 1,000 customers with access to this at this point. I would say maybe only a handful of people have actually been able to be in an off-the-grid situation where they're actually using this technology at this point. But over time, I expect these satellite networks to get much better. Right now, you're able to do very low bandwidth text messages with friends, with emergency services. But over the arc of time, maybe 5-10 years, I expect these to evolve to be able to send images, video, power applications, maybe one day even make brief phone calls. But I still think we're ways away from that happening.
Mark, this is coming in a week where we're going to get earnings from Apple. The indications aren't great. Worries about risks of tariffs, weakness in China. What will you be watching out for when we get that earnings report tomorrow?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of peripheral stuff around the edges facing Apple right now. Obviously, there's the presumptive tariff situation that's going to impact them given the second Trump administration. Obviously, there's concerns about iPhone sales in China. According to Counterpoint Research, Huawei, in terms of flagship phone sales, has now topped the iPhone there, with iPhone sales falling somewhere north of 18% in China. You have the situation with its artificial intelligence service being very basic at this point. But none of that really matters, right, to investors if Apple crushes the Wall Street forecasts. And last I checked, the forecasts are, between 3 and 6% growth year over year. And if they beat that, I think investors will be happy, all things considered. It's very likely going to be a record quarter for Apple, all time throughout the history of the company, the most revenue they ever generated in a quarter. There's a possibility, I would say it's a coin flip possibility, that you're even going to see a record on both iPhone and services sales as well. So if they go 3 for 3 on that, right, all-time revenue record, all-time iPhone revenue record, all-time services record, despite all the very real noise of surrounding them, I think they'll have a positive story to tell.
Oh, Mark, I can sense you have your bingo card out already for when you get that report. But I did want to ask you one more thing about this. It's been a week, of course, where the AI stories dominated markets. The whole question around DeepSeek and what it might mean for AI and for big tech companies. Where is Apple in the AI journey? Where should we be thinking about it to cite it in that story where we could be looking at perhaps a new revolution in the AI space?
Well, I would say of all the things that Apple is prioritizing and working right now, I would say their AI effort is probably the least impressive of the bunch. I mean, up there with the Vision Pro. The Vision Pro certainly is even less impressive than the AI work. But at the same time, they're very much behind there. There are serious questions about their work. There are serious questions about why they're so behind OpenAI and other competitors. But this DeepSeek situation, you noticed Apple stock went up when all the other companies went down because of DeepSeek. And I think DeepSeek, what it did is it did affirm a couple of strategies that Apple's doing here with AI. One strategy is to be sort of the Switzerland of AI and be the platform of AI and have all these companies run on top of their operating system. So I think that DeepSeek, if that continues to see momentum, there is some potential beneficiary to Apple here from subscriptions and the like. So we'll see what happens there. For one, okay. I think it's going to get banned, but that's just my speculation. The other thing is that DeepSeek is very light AI models, a lot of stuff running on device, and Apple's really pushing the on-device idea for processing these generative AI models versus pushing everything to the cloud like OpenAI and Google.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.